The phone in my hand trembled slightly as I stared at the email notification. 20 years. 20 years of silence. And now this. Pinnacle Technologies wanted to license my old patents I'd almost forgotten about, for a groundbreaking, new medical device. The licensing fee they offered made my eyes widen, $2 million up front, with royalties that could eventually exceed $10 million. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I sat alone in my kitchen, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the worn tile floor. My first thought wasn't about the money. It was about my grandchildren's faces when they'd learn their just grandma had created something so valuable that major corporations were fighting to acquire it. For 7 years, I'd been Margaret Wilson, or Maggie to my friends. But to my children and grandchildren, I was simply Grandma, the woman who baked cookies, babysat on weekends, and kept her opinions to herself, the woman whose greatest value was measured in free childcare and holiday dinners, the woman whose past didn't matter because her present role was so convenient for everyone else. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tomorrow was my 70th birthday. Daniel and Jessica, my son and daughter, were planning a special dinner, the same restaurant as always, the same vanilla cake, the same perfunctory gifts. A scarf, perhaps, slippers, something befitting just Grandma. I hadn't planned to. Tell them about the email. Not yet. I wanted to savor this moment of vindication privately. But as I scrolled through the message again, another email arrived, this one from Dr. Catherine Reynolds, my former research partner. Maggie, they've finally recognized our work. Call me immediately. This changes everything. Yes, I thought, this changes everything. The morning of my 70th birthday dawned bright and clear. I'd spent the night thinking about Catherine's call and the unexpected turn my life had taken. Catherine had been ecstatic, her voice crackling with excitement as she explained that Pinnacle Technologies had tracked us both down after discovering our research had anticipated the very technology they'd been struggling to perfect. They want us both at their headquarters next month, she'd said. This is validation, Maggie. All those years we were told our ideas were too ambitious, too theoretical. And now look, we were just ahead of our time. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple blue dress that Thomas, my late husband, had always loved. Thomas had been gone 5 years now. Sometimes I wondered if things would have been different if he were still alive. He had always been my champion, the one person who never let me forget what I'd accomplished before becoming just Grandma. By 10 o'clock, my phone was chiming with birthday messages. I scrolled through them with a small smile, then paused, at a text from my granddaughter Zoe. Happy birthday, Grandma. Can't wait to see you tonight. I need help with a school project on family history. Maybe we can talk about it at dinner. I texted back a cheerful, looking forward to it, while wondering what Zoe would think when she learned about my past. At 15, she was bright and curious, always buried in her phone but surprisingly insightful when she did look up. Unlike her parents, Zoe sometimes asked me questions about my life before I became a grandmother. The doorbell rang at 11. When I opened it, I found Jessica standing there, elegant as always in her tailored pantsuit, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Happy birthday, Mom, she said, kissing my cheek. I brought you something. She held out a small gift. Check. Inside was a delicate silver picture frame with a photo of all my grandchildren. It's lovely, I said, genuinely touched. Thank you, Jessica. You're welcome. She glanced at her watch. Listen, I can't stay. I've got clients waiting. But I wanted to drop this off and remind you about dinner. 7 o'clock at Bella Vita. I remember, I assured her. Jessica was already turning to leave when she paused. Oh, and Mom? I invited Mark Thompson. You remember him from church? The widower? I thought it might be nice for you to have some. Or companionship. I stiffened. You're setting me up on a blind date? On my birthday? Jessica sighed. It's not a blind date. It's just dinner with a nice man who's also alone. You need to get out more, Mom. Make some friends your own age. It's been 5 years since Dad died. 5 years in which Jessica had never asked how I felt about dating again. 5 years of assumptions about what I needed. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully. But I wish you'd asked me first. Jessica's expression shifted to the patient, look she reserved for difficult clients and her aging mother. Mom, we just want you to be happy, to have someone. What else are you going to do with your time? What indeed? I thought of the patents, the research, the upcoming meeting at Pinnacle. Technologies. I thought of the ideas I still sketched late at night, the journals I still read, the online courses I quietly took while my children assumed I was watching reruns of old TV shows. I'll see you tonight, I said, choosing not to engage. Thank you for the gift. After Jessica left, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Thomas's old armchair, thinking. Thomas had understood what my work meant to me. When we met at Westlake University, I was finishing my PhD in biomedical engineering. He was completing his MBA. He'd been fascinated by my research, proud of my accomplishments. After we married, he encouraged me to continue my work even as we started our family. The turning point came when Daniel was 7 and Jessica was 4. I was offered a prestigious research position in Boston. Thomas supported the move, but my parents were aghast. Leave a stable situation for a risky research job? Uproot the children? Your place is with your family, my mother insisted. Those children need their mother, not some award-winning scientist. I took the position anyway. For 3 years, I balanced motherhood and research, making breakthroughs in medical sensor technology that led to my first patent. Thomas handled the children's schedules when I worked late, defended my career choices to his traditional colleagues, celebrated every milestone with me. Then Thomas's father suffered a severe stroke. We moved back to Oak Ridge to care for him, temporarily, I thought. I took what was supposed to be a short-term teaching position at the local community college. Weeks stretched into months. The research facility in Boston held my position for a year, then reluctantly filled it. I continued working remotely with Catherine, developing theories and designs that eventually led to 2 more patents. But without access to proper labs or funding, our progress slowed. By the time Thomas's father passed away 2 years later, I'd lost momentum. The children were settled in their schools. Thomas had established a successful accounting practice. And I gradually let my identity as Dr. Margaret Wilson, biomedical engineer, fade into the background. I taught math and basic science courses. I published occasionally in academic journals. I consulted on small projects. But slowly, imperceptibly, I became defined primarily as Thomas's wife, Daniel and Jessica's mother, and eventually, just Grandma. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thomas had been the only one who remembered, who still introduced me as Dr. Wilson at faculty events, who kept copies of my patents framed in his office, who encouraged me to keep in touch with my old colleagues. After his unexpected heart attack 5 years ago, even those small acknowledgments of my past achievements disappeared. My phone buzzed, interrupting my reverie. It was Daniel. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said when I answered. His voice had the distracted quality it always held when he was multitasking. "Looking forward to dinner tonight. Listen, I wanted to ask, can you watch Nathan on Saturday? Emily's got a client meeting and I've got golf with the partners." "Actually, I can't this Saturday," I said. The words felt foreign in my mouth. I almost never said no to babysitting requests. "What? Why not?" Daniel sounded genuinely confused. "I have plans," I said simply. "What plans?" Now he sounded skeptical. I hesitated. I'd planned to spend Saturday preparing for my meeting with Pinnacle Technologies, reviewing my old research notes, reconnecting with other colleagues. But something in Daniel's tone, the clear disbelief that I could have plans that didn't revolve around family obligations, made me change my answer. "I'm meeting an old friend for lunch," I said, which wasn't entirely untrue. I did plan to call Catherine again. "Can't you reschedule? This meeting is really important for Emily." I closed my eyes, counted to 3. "I'm sorry, Daniel. Not this time. Mom, we're really in a bind here." "There are plenty of babysitters in Oak Ridge," I pointed out. "Nathan is 12, not 2. He'll be fine with someone else for a few hours." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Daniel had never had to pay for childcare when I was available. The idea clearly irritated him. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll figure something out." After we hung up, I sat for a long moment, surprised by my own small act of rebellion. Tonight at dinner, I decided I would tell them about the patents, about Pinnacle Technologies, about the woman I had been before I became just grandma. I spent the afternoon going through old boxes in the attic, unearthing diplomas, awards, and photographs that had been stored away for decades. I found the original patent certificates, slightly yellowed with age but still impressive with their official seals and formal language. I discovered photos of myself in labs and at conferences, standing proudly beside prototypes and display boards. In one picture, a much younger version of myself stood at a podium accepting an innovation award, my eyes bright with accomplishment. By the time I needed to dress for dinner, I had assembled a small portfolio of my professional life, tangible proof of the person I'd been, the person I still was, beneath the grandmother exterior. Bella Vita was crowded when I arrived. I spotted my family at our usual large round table near the back. Daniel and Emily, Jessica and Michael, all 4 grandchildren, and an unfamiliar man who had to be Mark Thompson. They were already seated, cocktails and appetizers on the table. Not one of them had thought to wait for the birthday honoree before ordering. "There she is," Daniel called as I approached. He stood to kiss my cheek. "Happy birthday, Mom." Everyone echoed his wishes as I took my seat. Jessica immediately launched into introductions. "Mom, this is Mark Thompson. Mark, my mother, Margaret Wilson." Mark was a pleasant-looking man in his early 70s with a neatly trimmed white beard and kind eyes. He stood and extended his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Margaret. I've seen you at church many times, but we've never been properly introduced." "Nice to meet you, Mark," I said politely, though I was annoyed at Jessica's transparent matchmaking. Once we were all seated again, the conversation flowed around me. Daniel's work challenges, Emily's difficult clients, Jessica's latest property, listing, Michael's golf game. The grandchildren stared at their phones under the table, occasionally looking up when directly addressed. It was the same dynamic as every family dinner, the adults talking over each other while I listened and nodded, at appropriate intervals. "Grandma," Zoe said suddenly, looking up from her phone, "I've been researching our family tree for this school project, and I can't find much about what you did before you had Dad and Aunt Jessica. Did you work somewhere?" A perfect opening. I smiled at my granddaughter. "Actually, Zoe, Mom was a teacher," Daniel interrupted. "She taught math at the community college. Right, Mom?" "For a while, yes," I agreed. "But before that, she also makes the best chocolate chip cookies in 3 counties, Jessica added with a laugh. "Your grandma's always been the family backbone, taking care of everyone." Mark nodded approvingly. "That's admirable. Family is everything." I felt my opportunity slipping away. "I did enjoy teaching," I said, raising my voice slightly to reclaim the conversation. "But that was actually later in my career. I started as a research scientist." Emily's eyebrows rose. "Really? I didn't know that." "Yes," I continued, gaining confidence. "I have a PhD in biomedical engineering from Westlake University. I specialized in sensor technology for medical applications. A brief silence fell over the table. Daniel and Jessica exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. That's surprising, Michael said finally. We had no idea, Margaret. I actually have 3 patents, I continued, reaching for my purse where I'd placed the portfolio. And just yesterday, I received an offer from Pinnacle Technologies. They want to license my work for a new medical device they're developing. Now the silence was complete. Even the grandchildren looked up from their phones. Patents? Nathan asked, suddenly interested. Like inventions? You invented something, Grandma? I smiled at my grandson. Yes, I did. Medical sensors that can detect minute changes in blood chemistry. The technology was ahead of its time when I developed it, but now it's exactly what companies like Pinnacle need for their next generation of devices. How much are they offering? Daniel asked bluntly. I met his gaze. $2 million. Upfront with royalties that could reach $10 million over time. Emily's water glass froze halfway to her mouth. Jessica's lips parted in shock. Michael let out a low whistle. That's incredible, Mom, Daniel said, his voice strange. Why didn't you ever tell us about this? The question hung in the air, layered with unspoken accusations. Why had I kept secrets? Why had I let them believe I was just a retired teacher, just Grandma? But the real question, the one they weren't asking, was why hadn't they ever bothered to find out who I really was? You never asked, I said simply. Jessica recovered first. Of course we asked, she protested. We know you taught at the community college. You know what I did after we moved back to Oak Ridge, I corrected her. You were 4 years old. Jessica, did you never wonder what I did before that? Well, we assumed. She trailed off, realizing how damning the assumption was. We knew Dad was an accountant, Daniel said defensively. We just thought you were always, a homemaker, I supplied. Just a mom? Just Grandma? The discomfort around the table was palpable. Mark Thompson looked like he wished he were anywhere else. Wow, Grandma, that's really cool, Zoe said, breaking the tension. Can I interview you for my project? This is way more interesting than just saying you bake cookies. I smiled gratefully at my granddaughter. I'd like that, Zoe. So, what happens now? Emily asked, her marketing mind clearly calculating the implications. Will you have to travel to meet with this company? Yes, I said. My former research partner, Catherine Reynolds, and I are meeting with Pinnacle Technologies next month at their headquarters in San Francisco. They're flying us out, putting us up at a nice hotel. They want to discuss expanding on our original patents. San Francisco? Jessica repeated, sounding concerned. Mom, are you sure that's a good idea? At your age, traveling across the country, for business. I felt a flicker of irritation. At my age? Jessica, I'm 70, not 90. Catherine is 73 and still runs her own research lab. I just meant, I know what you meant, I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm. But this is important to me. This validation of my life's work is important to me. Daniel leaned forward, his financial acumen clearly engaged. Let's talk about this license agreement, Mom. Have you had a lawyer look at it? You need to be careful with these things. Maybe I should come with you to this meeting. I appreciate the concern, Daniel, but I've already spoken with a patent attorney. Catherine has one as well. We're quite capable of handling the negotiations. But $2 million, he persisted. That's a life-changing amount of money. We should discuss how to manage it properly. The we didn't escape my notice, nor did the calculating look that passed between Daniel and Jessica. I have some thoughts about the money, I acknowledged. But we don't need to discuss those tonight. This is supposed to be a birthday celebration after all. Jessica seized the opportunity to change the subject. Absolutely. Let's order dinner. And Mark has been so patient while we've had this family discussion. Mark smiled politely. It's fascinating, actually. I had no idea I was sitting next to such an accomplished scientist. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced normalcy. We ordered food, cut the cake, opened presents. But everything had shifted. I caught my children watching me with new eyes, reassessing, recalculating. The grandchildren peppered me with questions that their parents had never thought to ask. Who was I? What had I invented? Would I be famous now? As we were preparing to leave, Daniel pulled me aside. Mom, about Saturday. Don't worry about watching Nathan. We'll figure something out. Thank you, Daniel. He hesitated, then added, I'm sorry if I never really understood what you gave up for us. Moving back to Oak Ridge, leaving your research position. That must have been hard. It was the first genuine acknowledgement from either of my children, and it caught me off guard. It was a choice I made, I said carefully. I don't regret being there for you and Jessica, for Dad's father. But sometimes I do wonder what might have happened if I'd found a way to continue my research more actively. Daniel nodded, looking thoughtful. Well, it seems like you're getting a second chance now. That's good, Mom. Really. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the evening's revelations. I'd expected shock, perhaps even admiration. What I hadn't anticipated was the subtle but unmistakable shift in how my family perceived me. For years, I'd been defined by what I gave: time, care, emotional support. Now, suddenly, they were seeing me as someone who might have something valuable beyond my availability for babysitting and holiday hosting. The question was, what would this mean for our relationship going forward? And more importantly, what did I want it to mean? At home, I found myself too restless for sleep. I went to my small study, the room my children thought I used mainly for reading mystery novels and writing occasional letters, and opened my laptop. The email from Pinnacle Technologies glowed on the screen. I began typing a response, confirming the meeting in San Francisco. My fingers moved briskly over the keys, muscle memory from decades of academic writing returning easily. Dr. Margaret Wilson, I typed at the end, my title preceding my signature. Then I sat back, feeling a curious blend of emotions: pride, anticipation, and a quiet sense of reckoning. For the first time in years, I was stepping back into the world as Dr. Wilson, scientist, inventor, patent holder. Not just Grandma. The familiar weight of my family's expectations seemed to lift slightly from my shoulders. Tomorrow would bring more conversations, more adjustments, more negotiations of boundaries, both professional and personal. But tonight, sitting in the pool of lamplight at my desk, I felt myself expanding beyond the narrow role I'd been assigned. I thought of Zoe's project, of the chance to share my story with a granddaughter who might be inspired by it. I thought of Catherine, of our upcoming meeting, of the validation our work was finally receiving. And I thought of Thomas, who had always seen me clearly, who would have been proud of this moment. Watch me now, I whispered to his memory. Watch what comes next. The days following my birthday dinner unfolded in ways I hadn't anticipated. I expected questions, perhaps even some newfound respect from my children. What I didn't expect was how quickly they would pivot from seeing me as just Grandma to viewing me as an asset to be managed. Saturday morning, my doorbell rang promptly, at 9. When I opened it, I found Daniel standing there, coffee carrier in one hand, leather portfolio in the other. His usual weekend golf attire was replaced by a button-down shirt and slacks, his casual business look. "Morning, Mom," he said, breezing past me into the living room. "Brought you a latte. Thought we could talk." I accepted the coffee with a mix of surprise and wariness. Daniel rarely appeared unannounced, especially not on a Saturday morning when golf was sacred. "This is unexpected," I said, settling into my favorite armchair while Daniel took the sofa, already opening his portfolio. "I've been thinking about what you told us," he said, pulling out a legal pad covered with notes. "About the patents and Pinnacle technologies. I did some research last night. Mom, do you understand how significant this deal could be?" "I believe I do," I replied, taking a sip of my latte. "Catherine and I have been discussing it extensively." Daniel looked up, his expression a blend of concern and condescension that I recognized all too well. It was the same look he gave Nathan when his son claimed to understand something Daniel deemed beyond his comprehension. "With all due respect, Mom, this is high-level corporate negotiation, patent licensing, royalty structures, intellectual property rights. These are complex legal and financial matters. I deal with similar situations in my work. I can help navigate this." I studied my son over the rim of my coffee cup. Daniel had always been certain of his own competence, even as a child. He'd approach a jigsaw puzzle I'd been working on for hours, place two pieces together, and declare it simple. That same confidence had served him well in his finance career, but it sometimes blinded him to others' capabilities. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully. "But as I mentioned last night, Catherine and I have already engaged patent attorneys. The preliminary agreement looks quite favorable." Daniel waved this away. "Mom, no offense, but you're not exactly experienced in these matters. When was the last time you negotiated anything more complicated than a car purchase? And this Catherine, who is she exactly? Are you sure she has your best interests at heart?" I felt a flare of irritation. "Catherine Reynolds was my research partner for over a decade. She has a PhD from MIT, ran the biomedical research division at Westlake University for 15 years, and currently oversees her own research lab. And as for my negotiation experience, I secured research grants totaling over $5 million during my career." Daniel had the grace to look slightly abashed, but he pressed on. "That was a long time ago, Mom. Things have changed. The corporate world is different now. More aggressive, more complicated. Look, I've drafted some notes on how we should approach this." I noticed his use of "we" again, but said nothing as he launched into an elaborate explanation of negotiation tactics, financial structures, and investment strategies. He had clearly spent his Friday evening researching the situation, and despite my irritation, I was touched by the effort. "So ideally, we'd structure the payment to minimize tax implications," he was saying. "I can introduce you to my financial advisor. He handles high-net-worth clients exclusively. And for the ongoing royalties, we should establish a family trust to—" "Daniel," I interrupted gently, "you've clearly put a lot of thought into this, and I'm grateful. But there's something I need to clarify. This opportunity, these patents, they're mine. My work, my intellectual property, my decision how to proceed." He looked startled. "Of course they're yours, Mom. I'm just trying to help you maximize the benefit, for all of us." There it was. All of us. "I haven't made any decisions about how I'll use the money," I said, keeping my voice level. "That's something I need to consider carefully." Daniel's expression shifted subtly. "Well, obviously it's your money, but Mom, this is a family windfall. Think about what this could mean for Zoe and Nathan's college funds, for Jessica's kids. We could help Olivia attend that arts program she's interested in. You've always been so generous with family." I had been generous with my time, my energy, my availability. But this was different. This was recognition of my life's work, validation of sacrifices made and opportunities abandoned. Did I owe that to my family as well? "I'll certainly consider how this might benefit everyone," I said neutrally. "But first, I need to focus on the meetings with Pinnacle. There's a lot to prepare." Daniel looked like he wanted to press the issue, but instead nodded and changed tack. "About that, I think I should accompany you to San Francisco. As support, you know. These tech executives can be intimidating. I smiled despite myself. I've presented research to Nobel laureates, Daniel. I think I can handle a few tech executives. He didn't smile back. Mom, I'm serious. Going alone isn't wise. If you won't take me, at least let Jessica go with you. She's good with people and she travels for work all the time. I won't be alone. Catherine will be there. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. This Catherine? You haven't seen her in what, 20 years? 30? People change, Mom. How do you know she hasn't already cut some side deal with Pinnacle? How do you know she's not taking advantage of you? The suggestion was so absurd, I nearly laughed. Catherine, who had remained in academia when she could have made millions in the private sector. Catherine, who had published our joint research under both our names even during the years I was too overwhelmed with family obligations to contribute equally. Catherine, who had called me immediately when Pinnacle reached out, insisting we approach this as equal partners despite her more extensive subsequent work in the field. Catherine is not taking advantage of me, I said firmly, and I don't need a chaperone for this meeting. Daniel closed his portfolio with a snap. Fine, but at least let me look over any paperwork before you sign it. Promise me that much. To end the conversation, I agreed, knowing I had no obligation to follow through. After Daniel left, I sat for a long time, thinking about his reaction. The shift from seeing me as a dependent to seeing me as a potential source of wealth was jarring, but not entirely surprising. Daniel had always been pragmatic about money. What bothered me more was his immediate assumption that I was incapable of managing my own affairs, that at 70 I needed his supervision and protection. I was still mulling this over when Jessica called that afternoon. Mom, are you free? For lunch tomorrow? I thought we could go to that little cafe you like, the one with the good soup. Jessica rarely suggested lunch unless she needed something, usually childcare or help planning a family event. I agreed with curiosity, wondering what angle she would take. Maple Street Cafe was cozy and familiar, tucked between a bookshop and a vintage clothing store in Oak Ridge's small downtown. Jessica was already waiting when I arrived, an unusual occurrence. More surprising still was the large gift bag on the chair beside her. A belated birthday gift? I asked as I sat down. Jessica smiled. Sort of. I realized the frame I gave you was pretty impersonal. After what you told us last night, I wanted to get you something more meaningful. She pushed the bag toward me. Inside was a sleek silver laptop, still in its box. Your computer is ancient, Mom, Jessica explained. If you're going to be doing business with a major tech company, you need proper equipment. This has all the latest features. I was touched by the gesture, even as I recognized it as the kind of gift one gives to smooth the way for a request. Thank you, Jessica. That's very thoughtful. I also added you to our family cell phone plan, she continued. You'll get a new phone on Tuesday. Better reception, more data. You'll need it for video calls with these Pinnacle people. I raised an eyebrow. You've been busy. Well, this is exciting, isn't it? My mother, the inventor. Her smile seemed genuine, but there was something calculating in her eyes. You know, I mentioned your patents to Michael's friend who works in tech. He was really impressed. Said medical sensors are huge right now, especially with the aging population. It's a growing field, I agreed, wondering where this was leading. We ordered lunch, and Jessica chatted about her real estate business, Olivia's dance recital, and Michael's recent promotion. It wasn't until our food arrived that she finally broached what was clearly her real agenda. So, Mom, she said, carefully arranging her napkin. Michael and I have been thinking about the Pinnacle situation. It's amazing, really, life-changing. And it got us thinking about other ways to leverage your expertise. I paused with my spoon halfway to my mouth. Leverage my expertise? Exactly. Your patents obviously have significant value. But have you considered consulting? Speaking engagements? There's a whole market for experts in emerging technologies. Michael's cousin works for a speakers bureau. He says someone with your background could command 5-figure fees for the right audiences. I set my spoon down. Jessica, I've been out of active research for decades. She waved this away. But you created something valuable, something companies want now. That makes you relevant. Plus, you have the perfect story. Female scientist ahead of her time, returning to claim her rightful recognition after years of focusing on family. People eat that stuff up. The commodification of my life's journey into a marketable narrative disturbed me, but I kept my expression neutral. I haven't thought about public speaking. My focus right now is on the Pinnacle agreement. Of course, Jessica nodded. But afterward, well, there are opportunities. I've already started putting together some ideas. She pulled out her tablet and opened a document titled Dr. Margaret Wilson Brand Strategy. I stared at her, genuinely shocked. You've created a brand strategy? For me? Just preliminary thoughts, she said, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Look, Mom, this could be huge for all of us. Your story has universal appeal. The forgotten female scientist, the dedicated grandmother, the late-life vindication. It's compelling. We could approach publishers about a memoir, maybe even film rights eventually. Film rights? I echoed, feeling increasingly disconnected from the conversation. Everyone loves an inspirational story about women breaking barriers. And the timing couldn't be better. There's so much interest in recognizing overlooked female contributions to science and technology. I sat back, studying my daughter. Jessica had always been ambitious, even as a child. Where Daniel systematically worked toward concrete goals, Jessica dreamed bigger, reached further. In her mind, she was already transforming her mother from a retired teacher into a celebrated scientific pioneer, with herself, no doubt, as the architect of this remarkable comeback. You've given this a lot of thought, I said carefully. It's what I do, Mom. I see potential and develop it. And there's so much potential here. Her eyes shone with genuine excitement. Think about what this could mean for our whole family. The connections, the opportunities. Olivia is already telling her friends that her grandmother is a famous inventor. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me was touched by Jessica's enthusiasm, her apparent pride in my accomplishments. Another part was deeply uncomfortable, with her presumption, her immediate move to commodify and capitalize on my life and work without any discussion of what I might want. I'm not looking for fame, I said gently, or a second career as a public speaker. Jessica's expression faltered, for just a moment before she recovered. Of course not. I just want to make sure you're aware of the possibilities. This is your moment, Mom. After all those years of putting everyone else first, you deserve to shine. The sentiment seemed genuine. But even as she spoke, Jessica was scrolling through her brand strategy document, adding notes. I recognized the behavior. It was exactly how she approached her high-end property listings, seeing not the homes people had lived and loved in, but the potential market value with the right staging and marketing. And financially, she continued, these opportunities could be significant, especially with college tuition increasing every year. Olivia has her heart set on Westlake University, actually, following in her grandmother's footsteps. She looked up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So there it was. The expectation that my unexpected windfall would naturally flow toward my grandchildren's education. An assumption so deeply ingrained that Jessica didn't even frame it as a request. Westlake is an excellent school, I said, neutrally. But Olivia is only 10. She may develop different interests by the time college becomes relevant. Jessica nodded absently, clearly not registering my lack of commitment. I've been thinking we should plan a family trip after your Pinnacle meeting to celebrate. Maybe that resort in Cedar Lake you always talked about visiting with Dad but never got around to? We could all go. Daniel's family, us, you. Make it a proper, multi-generational vacation. The presumption that I would want to fund such a trip went unstated but was perfectly clear. I sipped my water, choosing my next words carefully. Jessica, before we make any plans, I need to finalize the Pinnacle agreement. And afterward, I'll need time to think about what I want to do, both with the funds and with whatever opportunities might arise. A flicker of impatience crossed her face. Of course, Mom. I just thought— I appreciate your excitement, I interrupted gently. And your gift. The laptop will be very useful, but I need space to process all of this at my own pace. Jessica studied me for a moment, then nodded with what appeared to be reluctant acceptance. Sure, Mom, whatever you need, but promise you'll let me help when you're ready. This is what I do professionally, after all. I know how to position people and properties for maximum impact. I nearly pointed out that I was neither a person to be positioned nor a property to be marketed, but instead simply said, I'll keep that in mind. The rest of lunch passed in safer conversational territory. Jessica showed me photos of Olivia's recent dance competition and asked about my garden. I inquired about Michael's work and her latest listings. We maintained the pleasant surface-level exchange that had characterized our relationship for years. But something had shifted. Jessica was watching me more closely, evaluating, reassessing. I was no longer just her mother who needed checking in on. I was a potential asset with untapped value. As we prepared to leave, Jessica handed me a business card. Michael's cousin from the Speaker's Bureau, just in case you change your mind. I tucked it into my purse with a non-committal smile and hugged her goodbye. Walking home, I felt a heaviness. That had nothing to do with the rich soup I'd eaten. My children's reactions, while not entirely surprising, were nevertheless disappointing. I had hoped for genuine interest in the work itself, in the person I had been and still was beneath the grandmother role they'd assigned me. Instead, both had immediately focused on how my success might benefit them. At home, I set up the new laptop, appreciating its speed and clarity despite the circumstances of the gift. I had just finished transferring some files when my phone rang. It was Catherine. Maggie, she said without preamble, how quickly can you get to Westlake? There's something you should see. The urgency in her voice was unusual. What is it? I've been going through our old research files, preparing for the Pinnacle meeting, and I found something concerning. I'd rather not discuss it over the phone. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? I agreed, my stomach tightening with apprehension. After we hung up, I stared at the phone, wondering what Catherine could have discovered that warranted such caution. That evening, my doorbell rang again. This time it was Zoe, alone and slightly breathless, as if she'd biked over in a hurry. Hi, Grandma, she said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Can I talk to you about my project? I welcomed her, in offering cookies and tea, which she accepted with a distracted nod. We settled in the living room and Zoe pulled out her notebook, flipping past several pages of notes. So after dinner the other night, I started researching you online, she said. I found some of your academic papers and the patent listings, but not much else. It's like there's this whole part of your life that just disappeared from the record. I nodded. That's not uncommon for women in science from my generation, especially those who stepped back from active research to raise families. But it's not fair, Zoe protested with the passionate indignation of youth. You did important work. You should be recognized for it. I smiled at my granddaughter, touched by her outrage on my behalf. Well, Pinnacle Technologies has certainly recognized it now. Yeah, but that's because they want to use it, not because they care about giving you credit. Her expression was fierce. For my project, I want to tell your whole story, not just the parts everyone already knows, like being my dad's mom and making good cookies. but the part where you were a brilliant scientist who invented things that are still important today. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Here, finally, was the reaction I had hoped for. Not calculations about financial advantages or marketing opportunities, but genuine interest in my work and recognition of its significance. "I'd be happy to help with your project, Zoe." Her face lit up. "Awesome. I was thinking we could record an interview. I could ask you questions about your research and your career, and then use that for my presentation." "That sounds perfect," I agreed. Zoe hesitated, then asked, "Grandma, why didn't you ever tell us about being a scientist and having patents?" The question was asked without accusation, unlike the similar questions from her father and aunt. I considered my answer, carefully. "I suppose because no one seemed particularly interested. When you're a mother and grandmother, people tend to define you by those roles, and those are important roles, ones I cherish. But they're not the whole story." Zoe nodded thoughtfully. "Dad seemed really surprised. He kept talking about it. After we got home from your birthday dinner. Not just about the money part, but about how he never knew you worked in a lab and invented things." "What did he say?" I asked, curious about Daniel's private reaction. "He said it was weird that he grew up not knowing what his own mother did before he was born. And then he and Mom got into an argument because she said you obviously chose to focus on family instead of career, and he said maybe you didn't have a real choice back then." Zoe looked uncomfortable, clearly realizing she was revealing family dynamics not meant for my ears. "Your father's not entirely wrong," I said gently. "Women of my generation often face difficult choices between family and career. But every choice has consequences, and I don't regret the time I spent raising your father and aunt." Zoe was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you think it's different now? For women, I mean?" "In some ways, yes. There are more opportunities, more support. But the fundamental tensions still exist. Balancing personal fulfillment with responsibility to others is a universal challenge." She nodded, seeming to digest this. "I want to do both. Have a career and a family someday. I don't think people should have to choose." "I hope you won't have to," I said sincerely. We spent the next hour going through her questions about my education, my research, and the development of the patents. Zoe took careful notes, asking insightful follow-up questions that revealed her genuine interest and quick comprehension. It was the most in-depth conversation I'd had with any family member about my work in decades, and I found myself energized by her curiosity and enthusiasm. When she finally gathered her things to leave, Zoe surprised me with a fierce hug. "I'm proud of you, Grandma," she whispered. "I wish I'd known sooner how amazing you are." After she left, I sat in the quiet house, reflecting on the stark difference between my grandchildren's reactions and their parents. Where Daniel and Jessica immediately calculated advantage, Zoe simply wanted to understand and celebrate. It gave me hope that perhaps the next generation might avoid some of our mistakes. The following morning, I drove to Westlake University with a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. The campus had changed dramatically since my time there. New buildings, expanded grounds, modern architecture intersecting with the original stately structures. But as I walked toward the science complex, I felt a familiar sense of belonging that had nothing to do with family roles or community ties. This had been my intellectual home, the place where my mind had been most fully engaged and valued. Catherine was waiting in her office, a small but elegantly appointed space filled with books, awards, and photographs documenting a lifetime in science. At 73, she remained striking, tall and straight-backed, her white hair cut in a precise bob, her eyes sharp behind stylish glasses. We embraced warmly, our decades of friendship instantly rekindling despite the years of limited contact. "It's wonderful to see you, Maggie," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "Though I wish the circumstances were less complicated." "What have you found?" I asked, getting straight to the point. Catherine's expression became grave. She opened a folder on her desk and pushed it toward me. In preparing for the Pinnacle meeting, I requested all our original research files from the university archives. Most were exactly as we left them, but some contained additions I don't recognize, modifications to our testing protocols, alternative applications we never explored. I frowned, scanning the documents. These aren't ours? No, but they're filed under our names, dated just after you left Boston. I was still at the research facility then, but I never authorized these modifications. She handed me another document. And this patent application was filed 6 months after you moved back to Oak Ridge. It lists both our names, along with Dr. Lawrence Mercer. I looked up sharply. Mercer? I never collaborated with him. Neither did I, Catherine said grimly. Not willingly, at least. Mercer was appointed department head after Professor Allen retired. He had a reputation for, let's call it, appropriating other researchers' work. A cold sensation spread through my chest as I examined the application. It described a variation of our sensor technology, altered just enough to justify a separate patent, but clearly building on our original work. Did this patent get approved? I asked. Catherine nodded. It did. And here's where it gets interesting. Mercer left academia 2 years later to join HealthTech Innovations, which was eventually acquired by Pinnacle Technologies in 2015. The implications were becoming clear, and they were disturbing. So Pinnacle has been using a version of our technology for years, and now they want to license the original patents because they've hit the limits of what they can do with Mercer's altered version, Catherine finished. They need the fundamental principles we established in our original work to make the next breakthrough. I sat back, trying to process this information. So, we've been exploited. Our work was taken, modified without our consent, and has been generating profit for years, profit we never saw. Exactly, Catherine said grimly. And I suspect Pinnacle knows this perfectly well. Their sudden interest in licensing our original patents isn't just about new applications. It's about covering their legal exposure. If we were to discover the connection between Mercer's patent and ours, we could potentially sue for infringement. The betrayal stung, even after so many years. Not just Mercer's appropriation of our work, but the institutional failure to protect us. The ease with which 2 female researchers could be sidelined and their innovations co-opted. What do you suggest we do? I asked. Catherine's expression was resolute. We go to the meeting with Pinnacle, but instead of simply negotiating a licensing agreement, we bring this evidence. We demand not just payment for future use of our patents, but compensation for past infringement through Mercer's derivative work. That would significantly increase the financial stakes, I noted. Indeed. We're not talking about $2 million anymore, Maggie. If we can prove Pinnacle has been profiting from essentially stolen intellectual property for years, we could be looking at a settlement in the tens of millions. I was quiet for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what Catherine was suggesting. We'll need strong legal representation. Already arranged, she said with grim satisfaction. A former student of mine is now a partner at Silver & Chen, specializing in intellectual property law. She's reviewed our evidence and believes we have a compelling case. We spent the next several hours going through the files, identifying specific points where Mercer's patent clearly derived from our original work. The more we examined, the stronger the case appeared. What had begun as a straightforward licensing agreement was evolving into something far more significant, a reckoning for decades of unacknowledged exploitation. By the time I left Catherine's office, my mind was racing with implications. Not just the financial ones, though those were certainly substantial, but the personal vindication. Our work had been important enough to steal, important enough that a major corporation was still trying to control it decades later. There was a bitter satisfaction in that recognition, even as the betrayal burned. Driving home, I realized I would need to revise my approach to my children's sudden interest in my patents. If Catherine was right, if we were indeed looking at a much larger settlement, Daniel and Jessica's financial calculations would only intensify. Their assumptions about my willingness to share this windfall would become even more entrenched. And I found myself facing a difficult question. What did I actually owe my family? They were adults with established careers and comfortable lives. They had never shown interest in my professional achievements until money entered the equation. Did their status as my children automatically entitle them to the fruits of work they'd never valued? As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked outside my house. Sitting on my porch steps was a young woman I didn't recognize. Perhaps in her early 30s, with short dark hair and a messenger bag slung across her body. She stood as I approached. "Dr. Wilson?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Amelia Brooks. I'm an engineer at Pinnacle Technologies. I hope you don't mind my stopping by. I've been trying to reach you through official channels, but..." She hesitated. "Let's just say I'm here unofficially." I studied her with surprise and suspicion. "How did you find my home address?" She had the grace to look embarrassed. "I did some research. I needed to speak with you before your meeting with our executives next month." She glanced around nervously. "May we talk inside? What I have to say shouldn't be overheard." Intrigued despite my caution, I invited her in. Amelia declined my offer of tea, too anxious to observe social niceties. "Dr. Wilson, I've been working with your sensor technology, well, with the version based on your patents, for the past 3 years at Pinnacle. Your work is the foundation of our most promising medical products." I nodded, watching her carefully. "I recently learned that Pinnacle has been using a derivative of my work through Lawrence Mercer's patent." Amelia's eyes widened in surprise. "You know about that? That's actually why I'm here." She opened her messenger bag and pulled out a high flash drive. "This contains internal Pinnacle documents showing that the company has been aware of the problematic relationship between Mercer's patent and yours for years. They've been developing contingency plans in case you or Dr. Reynolds ever raised questions." I took the flash drive, shocked by her willingness to share what was clearly confidential corporate information. "Why are you giving me this?" Amelia's expression was earnest. "Because it's wrong. Your work deserves proper recognition and compensation. And because..." She hesitated, then continued with quiet intensity. "Your research is why I became an engineer. I read your papers in college. You and Dr. Reynolds were pioneers when few women were welcome in the field. What happened to your work? How it was taken and exploited. That's not acceptable." I was speechless for a moment, moved by her unexpected advocacy. "You're risking your job by coming here." She nodded grimly. "I know, but some things matter more than job security, professional integrity, justice, recognition of the shoulders we stand on." She stood to leave. "The executives you'll be meeting with next month have no intention of acknowledging the connection to Mercer's patent. They'll offer you the licensing deal and hope you never discover the full scope of how your work has been used. That flash drive gives you leverage." As she headed for the door, I called after her. "Amelia, why does this matter so much to you personally?" She paused, her hand on the doorknob. "My grandmother was a chemist in the 1960s. She developed a formula that a male colleague patented under his own name. She never got the credit or compensation. History repeats itself unless someone breaks the cycle." With a slight smile, she added, "Use that information well, Dr. Wilson. Make them pay fairly for what they took." After she left, I sat looking at the flash drive in my hand, feeling as though I stood at a crossroads. The path forward was suddenly more complex, more consequential than I had imagined when I first received Pinnacle's email. This wasn't just about recognition anymore. It was about justice, not just for Catherine and me, but for all the women whose intellectual contributions had been minimized, appropriated, or erased. And it was about legacy, what my life's work might ultimately mean, not just for my family, but for young women like Amelia Brooks, seeking their own paths in male-dominated fields. I inserted the flash drive into my new laptop and began to read, preparing myself for the battle ahead. Sleep eluded me that night. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, poring over the documents Amelia Brooks had provided. The flash drive contained a trove of internal memos, emails, and reports spanning decades, a corporate paper trail that meticulously documented Pinnacle's awareness of the connection between our original patents and Mercer's derivative work. Most damning was a legal strategy memo from 2017, outlining contingency plans if Catherine or I ever discovered the truth. The clinical language was chilling. Given the advanced age of both original inventors, the most cost-effective approach is continued monitoring until natural resolution of the potential claim. In corporate speak, they were waiting for us to die so the problem would disappear. By morning, I had compiled the most significant documents and emailed them to Catherine with a simple message. "We need to discuss this immediately." Her response came within an hour. My office, 2 p.m., bringing legal counsel. I spent the morning organizing my thoughts, making notes on a legal pad with hands that occasionally trembled with a fury I hadn't felt in years. The betrayal wasn't just Mercer's opportunistic theft of our work. It was institutional. The university that failed to protect us. The corporate system that rewarded the appropriation. The callous strategy of waiting for elderly women to conveniently disappear. At noon, Daniel called. "Mom, just checking in about San Francisco. I've been thinking we should book our flight soon. I found some reasonable options for the dates you mentioned." "I appreciate the thought," I said carefully. "But as I told you before, I don't need an escort to this meeting." A pause, then. "Mom, I'm not sure you understand what you're walking into. Corporate negotiations are—" "Daniel," I interrupted. "I'm dealing with something important right now. Can we talk about this later?" Another pause, longer this time. "Is everything okay?" The genuine concern in his voice softened my irritation slightly. Yes and no. The situation with Pinnacle is more complicated than I initially thought. But I'm handling it. "What do you mean, more complicated?" "Mom, if something's wrong, you need to tell me. I can help." I sighed, recognizing the inherent contradiction in his words, his insistence that I needed his help alongside his assumption that I couldn't properly assess what was happening. It was the same pattern that had defined our relationship for years, a presumption of my incompetence disguised as protective concern. "I'll explain everything soon," I said. "Right now, I need to prepare for a meeting." "What meeting? With who?" "Catherine and our attorney." "Attorney?" His voice sharpened. "Mom, you shouldn't be meeting with lawyers without family present. These people could take advantage of you. At least let me sit in on the call." The assumption that I needed his supervision to avoid being manipulated by my own legal counsel was the final straw. "Daniel, I am not going to debate this. I have been managing my own affairs for 70 years. I will handle this situation and brief you when appropriate." I hung up before he could respond, immediately feeling a twinge of guilt at my abruptness. Daniel meant well in his way, but his protective instincts had always manifested as control, and I couldn't afford that intrusion now, not with so much at stake. Minutes later, my phone chimed with a text from Jessica. "Dad says you're meeting with lawyers about the patents? Call me ASAP. Concerned." I silenced my phone and placed it in a drawer. Whatever family drama was unfolding would have to wait. At Westlake University, Catherine's office had been transformed into an impromptu war room. Maps of documentation covered her conference table. A smartly dressed woman in her 40s, Elaine Chen, I presumed, Catherine's former student and current legal counsel, was annotating sections of what appeared to be patent law. Catherine looked up as I entered, her expression a mix of determination and cold anger. Maggie, you've seen the files? I nodded, setting my own notes on the table. Every page. They've been exploiting our work for years and strategizing about how to avoid compensating us. Elaine Chen extended her hand. Dr. Wilson, it's an honor to meet you. I've read your original research. Brilliant work, especially considering the technological limitations of the time. Thank you, I said, shaking her hand. Though I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. From a legal perspective, Elaine said, these circumstances are actually quite favorable. The documents your whistleblower provided constitute strong evidence of willful infringement. Pinnacle knew they were using derivative technology from your patents and deliberately concealed this fact. What exactly does that mean for us? I asked. It means we can pursue a much stronger case than a simple licensing negotiation, Elaine explained. We can seek damages for past infringement, which could be substantial given how long they've been using the technology. And in cases of willful misconduct, courts can award triple damages. Catherine smiled grimly. We're not talking about millions anymore, Maggie. We're talking about potential damages in the tens of millions. The room seemed to tilt slightly as I absorbed this information. That's significant. It is, Elaine agreed. But I should caution that these cases can be protracted and difficult. Pinnacle will fight back hard. They have deep pockets and a strong incentive to avoid setting a precedent for other potential claims. How protracted? I asked, thinking. Of my age, of the time that might be required. Potentially years, Elaine admitted. Though with this evidence, we're in a position to push for an expedited settlement. I thought of the memo I'd read, their strategy of waiting for natural resolution. A surge of determination coursed through me. They're counting on our advanced age working against us. I don't intend to give them that satisfaction. Catherine reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Neither do I. For the next 3 hours, we strategized. Elaine outlined various approaches, from an aggressive legal battle to using the evidence as leverage for a substantially enhanced settlement. Catherine recommended the latter, and I agreed. A lengthy court case held no appeal. What we wanted was recognition and fair compensation. Our meeting with Pinnacle is still scheduled for next month, Catherine noted. I suggest we proceed as planned, but with adjusted expectations and strategy. Agreed, I said. We let them make their initial offer, then present our evidence and our terms. Elaine nodded. I'll draft a settlement proposal that accounts for both future licensing and compensation for past infringement. It's important that we appear reasonable, but firm. As the meeting concluded, Catherine walked me to my car. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the campus, and for a moment, I was transported back to our early days at Westlake. 2 young women passionate about science, convinced our work could make a difference. In many ways, it had, though not with the recognition or reward we'd envisioned. You seem pensive, Catherine remarked. I'm thinking about how different things might have been, if I hadn't left research, if we'd discovered Mercer's theft earlier. She shook her head. No use dwelling on might-have-beens. We're here now, with an opportunity to set things right. She paused, studying me. How is your family taking all this? I sighed. They're interested in the money, primarily. Daniel wants to manage everything. Jessica wants to market my story, and neither seems particularly concerned with the actual work or what it represents. And you? How do you feel about potentially coming into a substantial sum at this stage? Of life? It was a question I'd been asking myself since reading the documents. Conflicted. It's validation, certainly. But money has never been my primary motivation. And now I find myself wondering what to do with it, especially in relation to my family. Catherine's expression softened. Your children have comfortable lives, as I recall. Very. which is why their immediate focus on how my patents might benefit them is disappointing. And your grandchildren? I thought of Zoe's genuine interest, her pride in my work rather than its monetary value. They've shown more curiosity about the actual accomplishment than their parents have, especially my granddaughter Zoe. Catherine smiled. Then perhaps that's where your legacy truly lies. Not in what you leave them financially, but in what you show them about women's contributions to science and technology, about perseverance and delayed recognition. Her words resonated deeply. Throughout the day, focused on corporate betrayal and potential litigation, I had been thinking primarily in terms of justice and compensation. But Catherine reminded me of the deeper meaning, the story this moment might tell about women's intellectual contributions and the importance of their recognition. You're right, I said. This isn't just about money, it's about history, our place in it, and what we pass on to the next generation. We embraced before I got into my car. As I drove home, I felt a curious lightness despite the weight of the situation. There was clarity in having the full truth exposed, in finally seeing the complete picture of what had happened to our work. And there was power in deciding how to respond, not as victims, but as accomplished scientists demanding proper recognition. When I arrived home, I found Daniel waiting on my porch, his expression a mix of concern and irritation. I briefly considered driving past my own house, but instead parked and prepared for the confrontation. "Mom," he said as I approached, "I've been calling for hours. Jessica, too. Why aren't you answering your phone?" "I was in a meeting as I told you I would be." I unlocked my door and walked inside, Daniel following uninvited. "A meeting with lawyers, about your patents. Mom, you can't make these kinds of decisions without consulting family." I set down my bag and turned to face him. "Daniel, I understand you're concerned, but these patents are my intellectual property. The decisions about them are mine to make." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "It's not that simple. These decisions affect all of us. If you're involving attorneys, that suggests potential litigation, which could tie up the patents and any resulting funds for years." The fact that his mind went immediately to how legal action might delay his access to my money, rather than whether I had been wronged, confirmed my worst suspicions about his motivations. "What exactly happened at this meeting?" he pressed. "What? Are you planning?" I sighed, gesturing for him to sit. "I discovered some disturbing information. Pinnacle Technologies has been using technology derived from my patents for years, without attribution or compensation. They acquired it through a patent that was essentially stolen from my work." Daniel's expression shifted as he processed this information. "So, they've been infringing on your patent rights? Can you prove that?" "Yes, I have substantial documentation." He paused, recalculating. "That actually changes everything. If there's an infringement claim, the potential settlement could be much larger than a simple licensing deal." Of course, that would be his focus. "The attorneys believe so, yes. Mom, this is serious. You need proper representation. My firm works with some excellent intellectual property lawyers. Let me make some calls." I shook my head. Catherine has already engaged counsel. Elaine Chen from Silver & Chen. She specializes in patent infringement cases. Daniel frowned. "I've never heard of her." "Are you sure she's qualified? These cases require very specific expertise." The familiar dismissal of anything outside his direct knowledge stung, but I kept my voice level. "She's highly regarded in the field. Catherine vetted her thoroughly." "But how can you be certain? These attorneys know they're dealing with elderly clients who might not understand the complexities. They could be seeing you as an easy payday." I felt my patience fraying. "Daniel, I have a PhD. I taught at a university for decades. I am perfectly capable of assessing professional qualifications. He looked taken aback by my firmness. "I'm just trying to protect you, Mom." "Are you?" I asked quietly. "Or are you trying to control a situation that affects your potential inheritance?" His expression hardened. "That's not fair. Of course I care about your well-being. But yes, I also care about our family's financial security. What's wrong with that? If these patents are worth millions more than we thought, that impacts all of us." "In what way exactly? You and Jessica have successful careers. Your children have college funds. How does my potential settlement impact you beyond providing extra wealth you don't actually need?" Daniel looked genuinely confused by my perspective. "Mom, family resources are meant to be shared. Dad always said that." The invocation of... Thomas stopped me short. It was true. Thomas had believed strongly in family financial support. But he had also been my most ardent defender when it came to recognition of my professional accomplishments. Would he have seen this situation as I did, or as Daniel framed it? "Your father," I said carefully, "also believed in acknowledging women's intellectual contributions. He was proud of my work, not just what it might earn." Daniel had the grace to look slightly abashed. Of course he was, and I am too. But that doesn't change the practical reality that this potential settlement affects our whole family. I studied my son, trying to reconcile the eager little boy who had once built a laboratory in our backyard to be like Mommy with the financially focused adult before me. When had he stopped seeing me as a person with my own identity and purpose and started viewing me primarily as a resource for his family? "Daniel," I said finally, "I need you to listen carefully. I will manage this situation as I see fit. I will consider the family's interests, but I will make my own decisions about my intellectual property and any resulting compensation. Is that clear?" He stared at me, clearly unused to such directness from his traditionally accommodating mother. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "Okay, Mom, but promise me you'll at least keep me informed? No more ignoring phone calls or making major decisions without letting us know?" It was a reasonable request, even if his tone still carried an unwelcome note of paternalism. "I'll keep you informed of major developments, but I need space to handle this my way." After Daniel left, I retrieved my phone from the drawer and found it flooded with missed calls and messages, from Daniel, from Jessica, even from Emily and Michael. Word of my meeting with attorneys had clearly circulated through the entire family, generating speculation and concern. Or perhaps more accurately, panic about potential delays in accessing what they increasingly viewed as family funds. Instead of responding to the backlog, I texted Jessica a brief message. "Everything is fine. We'll explain when there's more to tell." Then I silenced notifications from everyone except Catherine and Elaine. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner, the doorbell rang again. I opened it to find Zoe on my doorstep for the second time, that week, this time clutching a laptop. "Hi, Grandma. Is this a bad time?" Her tentative expression was so different from her father's entitled assumption of access that I immediately softened. "Not at all. Come in." She followed me to the kitchen, setting up her laptop on the counter while I continued chopping vegetables. "I've been working on my project about you," she explained. "I wanted to show you what I've done so far and maybe ask a few more questions." "I'd love to see it," I said sincerely. Zoe opened a presentation titled "Hidden Brilliance: The Scientific Legacy of Dr. Margaret Wilson." The title slide featured a split image. On one side, a photo of me in my laboratory from the 1970s. On the other, a recent picture of me with my grandchildren. The juxtaposition was striking. Two versions of the same woman, separated by decades, yet connected by an unbroken thread of identity. "I found the lab photo in the university archives online," Zoe explained. "They have digitized collections of departmental photos going back to the 1960s. I stared at my younger self, white lab coat crisp, expression intense as I adjusted a piece of equipment. I'd forgotten how serious I looked when concentrating, how completely absorbed in the work. "You look so confident," Zoe observed. "Like, you knew exactly what you were doing and why it mattered." "I did," I said softly. "That was the wonderful thing about research. Even with all the challenges, I never doubted the importance of what we were trying to accomplish." Zoe clicked through her presentation, which thoughtfully traced my academic journey from undergraduate studies through my PhD and early research career. She had done impressive detective work, uncovering publications I'd forgotten and presentations I'd given at conferences long past. "This is remarkable, Zoe. Where did you find all this information?" She shrugged. "Google Scholar has a lot of your early papers. And once I had those, I could see who cited them, which led to more connections. Plus, I found your thesis in the Westlake Digital Repository." "You read my thesis?" I was genuinely surprised. It was hardly accessible reading for a teenager. "Not all of it," she admitted with a grin. "The technical parts went over my head, but the introduction and conclusion were really interesting. How you talked about the potential applications for early detection of chemical changes in the bloodstream. You were basically describing continuous glucose monitoring and other wearable, medical tech decades before they existed." I felt a swell of pride, not just in my past work, but in my granddaughter's insight and initiative. "That's exactly right. We envisioned sensors that could detect minute changes and provide early warnings of developing conditions. The technology wasn't quite there yet, but the theoretical framework was sound. And now Pinnacle Technologies wants to use your patents to make exactly that kind of technology, right?" "Yes," I said carefully, wondering how much to share about the complications. Though the situation has become more complex. Zoe looked up from her laptop. "Complex how?" I hesitated, then decided that transparency was appropriate. Zoe wasn't asking about financial implications. She was genuinely interested in the science and ethics involved. "I've discovered that aspects of my work were used without proper attribution for many years. A colleague essentially took our research, modified it slightly, and patented it as his own. That patent eventually ended up at Pinnacle." Zoe's eyes widened. "So they stole your ideas? That's messed up." Her indignation was refreshing in its purity. "It's complicated. Academic research builds on previous work, and the boundaries aren't always clear. But yes, in this case, there was inappropriate use of our intellectual property." "What are you going to do about it?" "Catherine, my research partner, and I are preparing to confront Pinnacle with the evidence. We'll be seeking proper recognition and compensation." Zoe nodded firmly. "Good. You should. It's not just about the money, right? It's about giving credit where it's due." "Exactly," I said, touched by her understanding. "It's about acknowledging contributions that have been overlooked." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Is that why you never told us about your scientific work?" "Because it had been, I don't know, taken from you." The question caught me off guard. I'd never explicitly connected my silence about my professional past with the unacknowledged appropriation of my work. But perhaps there was truth in the suggestion. Had I internalized the message that my contributions weren't significant enough to mention because they hadn't been properly recognized by the scientific establishment? Perhaps partly, I acknowledged. When you've created something meaningful but seen it attributed to others or simply forgotten, it becomes easier to stop mentioning it at all. But it was also about compartmentalization. After I left active research, I focused on being a mother, then a teacher, then a grandmother. Those roles became my identity to most people. "But they're not your whole identity," Zoe said matter-of-factly. "You're still Dr. Wilson, too." I smiled at her simple but profound observation. "Yes, I am. Thank you for reminding me." We continued reviewing her presentation, with Zoe asking insightful questions about my research process and the challenges of being a woman in science during that era. As we talked, I found myself sharing stories I hadn't recalled in years: the exhilaration of successful experiments, the frustration of institutional barriers, the camaraderie with fellow female scientists navigating a predominantly male field. "Did you ever regret it?" Zoe asked suddenly. "Giving up your research career to move back here?" It was the question that had haunted me for decades, one I rarely allowed myself to consider directly. "Regret isn't quite the right word," I said slowly. "I made choices based on the information and options available at the time. Your great-grandfather needed care. Your father and aunt were settled in their schools. Your grandfather had established his practice here. The research facility in Boston could only hold my position for so long. But if things had been different, if there had been better family leave policies, or if great-grandpa could have had in-home care, or if grandpa could have moved his accounting practice, would you have stayed in research?" The penetrating question from someone so young struck me deeply. "Yes," I admitted. "If those supports had existed, I would have continued my research career." "That makes me sad," Zoe said softly. "Not that you raised Dad and Aunt Jessica. I'm glad you did that. But sad that you had to choose. That society didn't make it possible for you to do both." I reached across the counter and squeezed her hand. "That's why it matters so much that things are changing. So girls like you can pursue careers in science or technology without the same forced choices." "Is that why you're fighting Pinnacle now? To help change things?" "Partly," I agreed. "It's about establishing that women's intellectual contributions matter and should be properly attributed and compensated, even decades later." Zoe nodded thoughtfully, then turned back to her laptop. "I have one more slide to show you. It's about your legacy." The final slide displayed a timeline connecting my early research to modern medical devices, showing how the theoretical framework we established had influenced subsequent developments in wearable health technology. At the bottom was a quote from my thesis conclusion. "The future of medicine lies not in treating disease once it manifests, but in continuous monitoring systems that detect the earliest chemical signals of imbalance, allowing for preventive intervention." "You predicted the future, Grandma," Zoe said with evident pride. "Decades before anyone else was talking about wearable health monitors or continuous testing, you saw what was coming." Looking at the timeline, at the clear thread connecting my early work to technologies now used by millions, I felt a wave of emotion, pride in what we had accomplished, satisfaction in seeing our theoretical framework validated, but also a lingering sadness for the career cut short, for the additional contributions I might have made had circumstances been different. "Thank you for this, Zoe," I said, my voice slightly unsteady. "Seeing it laid out this way, it means a great deal." "I'm presenting it next week," she said. "Would you come? Maybe talk to my class about your work for a few minutes? They'd be really impressed to meet a real inventor." The invitation touched me deeply. I'd be honored. After Zoe left, I sat with my half-prepared dinner, no longer hungry. Our conversation had unearthed feelings I'd carefully managed for decades, the complex mix of pride in my family alongside the quiet grief for the career I'd loved and left. Thomas had understood that duality, had seen both the scientist and the mother in me. But after his death, it seemed that part of my identity had faded from everyone's view, including perhaps my own. Until now. Until Pinnacle's unexpected interest. In patents I'd almost forgotten. Until Amelia Brooks appeared on my doorstep with evidence of corporate exploitation. Until Zoe's project resurrected the passionate young researcher I had once been. I walked to my study and opened the bottom drawer of my desk, withdrawing a leather journal I hadn't looked at in years. It contained notes and sketches from the period after I'd left formal research, ideas for refinements to our sensor technology, theoretical models for new applications, Concepts that had come to me while grading papers or watching my children's soccer games. Ideas I'd recorded faithfully, even when there was no laboratory where I could test them, no research team to collaborate with, no path to implementation. Turning the pages, I was struck by the continuity of thought despite the interruption in my career. The scientist in me had never stopped working, never stopped seeing possibilities, even when external circumstances limited my ability to pursue them. And some of these concepts, particularly those related to miniaturization and power, efficiency, were remarkably aligned with directions Pinnacle was currently exploring. I wasn't just a woman with valuable old patents. I was still an innovator with relevant insights. My phone chimed with a text from Catherine. Elaine has drafted our proposed settlement terms. Review meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. I texted back my confirmation, then returned to the journal, reading through concepts that had existed only in my mind for decades. Tomorrow, we would begin the process of seeking justice for past exploitation. But perhaps there was more to this story, a future chapter that involved not just compensation for what had been taken, but recognition of what I might still contribute. With renewed purpose, I began making notes for our meeting, not just about settlement terms and compensation structures, but about potential ongoing consultation relationships. If Pinnacle wanted access to our foundational patents, perhaps they should also have access to the decades of unrealized innovation that had followed. Ideas that had never found their way into formal research but remained viable, valuable, and unexplored. For the first time in years, I felt the familiar excitement of scientific possibility, the same energy that had driven me through graduate school and early research. But now it was tempered by life experience, by perspective that only time could provide. I wasn't the same ambitious young scientist who had developed those initial patents. I was something perhaps more valuable, a thinker with both groundbreaking ideas and the wisdom to understand their implications. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me was lined with age, certainly, but the eyes were bright with renewed purpose. Dr. Margaret Wilson, I said softly to my reflection. Not just a grandmother, not just a retiree, but a scientist whose work still mattered. A woman whose intellectual contributions had shaped an entire field, whether properly credited or not. And now, perhaps, a woman about to reclaim her rightful place in the story of medical technology, not as a footnote or a forgotten pioneer, but as an active, engaged participant in her own legacy. The atmosphere in the Pinnacle Technologies Conference room crackled with tension. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of San Francisco Bay, but none of us were admiring the scenery. Catherine sat beside me, her posture perfect, her expression impassive. Across the gleaming table, 4 Pinnacle executives studied us with carefully neutral expressions. Robert Jenkins, the CEO, had greeted us with practiced charm that quickly dissipated once Elaine Chen introduced herself as our legal counsel. "We weren't aware you'd be bringing an attorney to this preliminary discussion," he said, his smile faltering. "Given the complexity of what we'll be discussing, legal representation seemed prudent," Catherine replied smoothly. Jenkins exchanged glances with his team, the chief legal officer, the head of research and development, and a younger man introduced as the lead medical technology engineer. Their body language shifted subtly, recalibrating from what they had clearly anticipated would be a straightforward negotiation with 2 elderly women to something altogether more challenging. "Well then," Jenkins said, regaining his composure, "let's get started. As you know, Pinnacle is interested in licensing your sensor technology patents for our next generation of wearable health monitors. We believe your foundational work, combined with our advanced development capabilities, could create truly revolutionary products." I maintained a pleasant expression, saying nothing as he launched into an elaborate presentation about Pinnacle's market position, their commitment to innovation, and the potential reach of products incorporating our technology. The subtext was clear. We should be grateful for their interest, for the opportunity to see our work finally implemented on a global scale. 20 minutes into Jenkins' presentation, Catherine gently interrupted. This is all very impressive, Mr. Jenkins. However, we're already quite familiar with Pinnacle's market position. Perhaps we could move directly to discussing the terms you're proposing? Jenkins paused, then nodded to the chief legal officer, who slid folders across the table to each of us. We're prepared to offer $2 million for exclusive licensing, rights to the patents in question with a royalty structure of 3% on direct applications, he stated. I opened the folder and scanned the document inside, noting the restrictive clauses and limited scope of the royalty agreements. If I hadn't known what we now knew, the offer might have seemed generous. In light of the truth, it was almost insulting. Before we respond to your proposal, Elaine said, opening her own portfolio, there are some matters we need to clarify. She removed a stack of documents, copies of the files Amelia Brooks had provided. We've recently become aware of the connection between Dr. Wilson and Dr. Reynolds' original patents and technology Pinnacle has been using for over a decade through a derivative patent filed by Lawrence Mercer. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The chief legal officer's expression hardened, while Jenkins maintained a careful poker face. The R&D director and the young engineer exchanged uncomfortable glances. We have extensive documentation, Elaine continued, passing copies across the table, showing that Pinnacle has been aware of this connection for years. Documents indicating that the company has deliberately concealed this relationship while continuing to profit from technology that directly builds upon my client's foundational work. Jenkins glanced at the top document, then pushed the stack toward his legal officer without comment. These are serious allegations, Ms. Chen. However, patent law is complex. Derivative works and parallel development are notoriously difficult to establish in court. Perhaps, Elaine agreed, but internal memos acknowledging the connection and outlining strategies to avoid compensating the original inventors are considerably less ambiguous. Particularly the memo from 2017 that explicitly references waiting for my client's natural resolution, an elegant euphemism for death, I presume. The young engineer flinched visibly at this, though the executives maintained their composure. Where did you obtain these documents? The chief legal officer asked sharply. That's not relevant to our discussion, Elaine replied. What matters is their content and authenticity, neither of which I believe you'll contest if this reaches litigation. Jenkins leaned forward, his expression grave. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. If there are concerns about the relationship between Mercer's patent and your client's work, we're certainly open to discussing a more comprehensive agreement that addresses historical applications. I'm glad to hear that, I said, speaking for the first time. Because we're not merely interested in licensing fees and royalties going forward, we're seeking proper acknowledgement and compensation for decades of unattributed use of our intellectual property. The negotiations that followed were intense and technical. Elaine presented our counteroffer, $15 million in immediate compensation for past infringement, public acknowledgement of our contribution to the technology Pinnacle had been, marketing, ongoing royalties at 8%, and consulting positions for both Catherine and me to advise on future developments. The Pinnacle team balked at the figure and the public acknowledgement, arguing that it would expose them to shareholder lawsuits and damage their corporate reputation. We went back and forth for hours, the discussion occasionally becoming heated, but always returning to the fundamental reality. We had leverage they hadn't anticipated, and they needed our cooperation more than we needed their offer. By late afternoon, we had reached a tentative agreement, $12 million in compensation, privately acknowledged as settlement for past use, ongoing royalties at 6%, consulting contracts for both of us at substantial annual retainers, and naming rights on the next generation of technology, the Wilson-Reynolds biosensor platform, would be prominently featured in all technical documentation and patent filings. As we prepared to leave, Jenkins approached me directly. "Dr. Wilson, despite these unfortunate circumstances, I want you to know that your work has been genuinely foundational. Our engineers have long regarded your patents as breakthrough innovations." I met his gaze steadily. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I look forward to finally receiving proper credit for that foundation, and to contributing to its future development." In the elevator descending from Pinnacle's offices, Catherine, Elaine, and I maintained our professional demeanor. But once we reached the privacy of our hotel suite, the composure crumbled. Catherine threw her arms around me, laughing with the pure joy of vindication. Elaine popped open a bottle of champagne she'd apparently had waiting in anticipation of our success. "To the Wilson Reynolds biosensor platform," Catherine toasted, her eyes bright. "Only 30 years overdue." "And to standing our ground," Elaine added. "You were magnificent in there, both of you. Most clients would have jumped at their first counteroffer." I sipped the champagne, feeling a curious blend of triumph and melancholy. "It's strange," I said. "All these years, I convinced myself that leaving research was a simple choice: family obligations, my husband's career, my father-in-law's health. But today made me realize how much was taken from me, not just by circumstances, but by a system that made it so easy for a man like Mercer to appropriate women's work." Catherine nodded, her expression softening. "We can't get those years back, Maggie, but we can certainly make these next ones count." "Starting with our consulting contracts," Elaine said with a grin. "I made sure those were written as broadly as possible. You'll have significant input on how your technology is applied going forward." The realization was still sinking in. After decades of being sidelined, of watching from a distance as medical technology evolved along paths we had envisioned, we would now have direct influence over its future development. Not as retired scientists brought in for symbolic validation, but as recognized innovators whose insights still had value. "What will you do with your portion of the settlement?" Catherine asked as we moved to the balcony overlooking the bay. It was the question that had been occupying my thoughts since our meeting with Elaine the previous week. $12 million, split between us, after legal fees. A life-changing sum, especially at our age, and one that my children were undoubtedly already calculating into their financial futures. "I haven't decided yet," I admitted, "but I know it won't be exactly what my family is expecting." When we returned to Oak Ridge the following day, I found both Daniel's and Jessica's cars parked in my driveway. They were waiting on my porch, rising in unison as my taxi pulled up. "Mom!" Jessica called, hurrying down the steps. "We've been so worried. You haven't been returning calls. How did the meeting go?" I paid the driver and retrieved my suitcase before answering. The meeting went well. We reached an agreement with Pinnacle. Daniel stepped forward, taking my suitcase, without asking. "What kind of agreement? The original licensing deal?" "Much more comprehensive than that," I said, unlocking my front door. "But I'd like to get settled before discussing details. It's been a long trip." They followed me inside, exchanging glances that telegraphed their impatience. I could almost feel the questions radiating from them. How much money? When would it arrive? How would it be distributed? "Can I get you something to drink?" I asked, deliberately slowing the pace. "Some tea, perhaps?" "Mom," Jessica said with barely concealed exasperation, "we've been waiting for hours. Just tell us what happened with Pinnacle." I sighed, recognizing that there would be no peaceful unpacking until I satisfied at least some of their curiosity. "All right. The short version is that we negotiated a settlement that includes compensation for past use of our technology, ongoing royalties, consulting positions, and naming rights for the next generation of products." Daniel leaned forward. "Settlement? What do you mean by past use?" I gave them a condensed explanation of what we had discovered about Mercer's appropriation of our work and Pinnacle's subsequent exploitation of the derivative patent. As I spoke, their expressions shifted from confusion to shock to calculating assessment. "So this settlement," Daniel said slowly, "it's substantially larger than the original licensing deal they proposed." "Yes," I said simply. $6 million. Each for Catherine and me after legal fees. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. $6 million? Mom, that's incredible. "And the consulting contract?" Daniel pressed. "What does that involve?" "Regular meetings with their development team, review of proposed applications, input on new directions. It's a serious position, not a ceremonial title. The annual retainer is $200,000. Daniel sat back, visibly processing the implications. "This changes everything," he murmured. "Does it?" I asked quietly. "Does it change who I am, or what matters to me?" He looked startled by the question. "Of course not. But it changes what's possible, the security it provides, the opportunities it creates for our family." There it was again. The automatic assumption that my windfall was a family resource, a collective asset rather than personal compensation for my intellectual work. "I need to make some decisions about how to handle these funds," I said carefully. "I'd appreciate space to do that thoughtfully without pressure." Jessica reached for my hand. "Of course, Mom. But just think. Olivia's college is secure now, Nathan's too. Maybe we could finally take that family trip we talked about. And you could move somewhere nicer, maybe closer to one of us. Or invest in Daniel's new venture," Daniel added. "I've been considering a startup in financial technology. With proper capital backing—" "Stop," I said, more sharply than I intended. They both froze, unused to such directness from me. "I understand you're excited about the possibilities this settlement creates. But I need to be very clear. This money is compensation for my intellectual property and decades of unattributed use of my work. It is not a family windfall to be allocated according to everyone's wish list." Jessica's expression flickered between surprise and hurt. "Mom, we're just trying to help you think through the options. You've always been so generous with family. And I will continue to be generous in ways that I choose," I said firmly. "But this situation is different from anything we've experienced before. I've spent my entire adult life putting family needs first, moving back from Boston, giving up research, structuring my schedule around childcare and family events. This settlement isn't just money. It's recognition of the work I was forced to set aside. I need to honor that in how I use it." Daniel's brow furrowed. "What exactly are you saying, Mom? That you're not planning to help your family with this money?" I took a deep breath, choosing my next words carefully. "I'm saying that I will make thoughtful decisions about these funds based on my values and priorities. Some of those decisions will undoubtedly benefit family, but I won't simply distribute millions of dollars based on everyone's immediate requests." The tension in the room was palpable. Jessica looked on the verge of tears, while Daniel's expression had hardened into something closer to anger. "I think," I continued gently, "that we should table this discussion for now. I've just returned from an intense negotiation and need some time to decompress. We can talk more after I've had a chance to reflect." Neither of them moved. "When?" Daniel asked. "When will you make these decisions?" His persistence stung, reinforcing my growing certainty that I needed to establish clear boundaries. "I don't have a timeline, Daniel. And frankly, your insistence makes me less inclined to rush the process." Jessica, always more attuned to emotional currents, stood abruptly. "Let's go, Daniel. Mom's right. She needs rest. We can talk about this another time." She kissed my cheek, her smile tight. "Congratulations on the settlement, Mom. Whatever you decide, we're proud of you." Daniel hesitated, clearly wanting to press the issue, but eventually followed his sister's lead. At the door, he turned back. Just remember that family has always been your priority, Mom. Don't let this sudden wealth change that. After they left, I sat in the quiet house, reflecting on Daniel's parting words. They revealed so much about his perception. His belief that prioritizing family had been a choice rather than a societal expectation. His inability to see how limiting that singular focus had been. His implicit suggestion that asserting my own priorities now would somehow betray my true nature. The following week passed in a blur of activity. Elaine handled the final paperwork for the settlement. Catherine and I had our first official consulting calls with Pinnacle's development team, and I found myself in the unfamiliar position of interviewing financial advisors to help manage my sudden wealth. I selected a firm specializing in late-life windfalls, appreciating their focus on both personal goals and legacy planning. My children maintained a conspicuous distance during this time, though their absence felt strategic rather than respectful. Jessica sent casual texts asking about my day or sharing photos of Olivia's latest art project, never directly mentioning the settlement, but clearly keeping communication lines open. Daniel, less subtle, emailed links to articles about estate planning and intergenerational wealth transfer. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. On Thursday afternoon, as I was reviewing some of Pinnacle's technical documents, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Nathan standing on my porch, skateboard under his arm, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Nathan, this is a surprise." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Hi, Grandma. Is it okay if I come in? I wanted to talk to you about something." I welcomed him inside, offering a snack, which he accepted eagerly. At 12, Nathan was in that perpetual state of hunger that characterized early adolescence. "So," I said once he was settled with cookies and milk at the kitchen counter, "what brings you by today?" He fiddled with his glass, clearly struggling to articulate something. "I heard Mom and Dad talking about your patents and the money you got from that company," he finally said. They didn't know I was listening. I nodded, unsurprised. I imagine they've discussed it quite a bit. "Dad's really mad," Nathan continued. "He says you're being selfish and stubborn. Mom says to give you time, that you'll come around eventually." His accurate mimicry of Emily's measured tone made me smile despite the content. "And what do you think?" I asked. He looked up, his expression earnest. "I think it's your money. You invented something important, and they used it without asking. So now they have to pay you back." The simplicity of his assessment was refreshing. "That's essentially correct," I agreed. "Dad keeps talking about how much he could do with even $1 million from you. College funds and investments and stuff." Nathan hesitated, then added quietly, "But he never talks about what you might want to do with it." I was struck by the perceptiveness of his observation. "That's very insightful, Nathan." He shrugged. "It just seems obvious. If I invented something cool and got paid for it, I'd want to decide what to do with the money." "And what would you do, hypothetically, if you suddenly had $6 million? His eyes widened at the specific figure, which I realized he probably hadn't known. "Whoa, that's like a ton of money." He thought for a moment. "I'd probably buy a sick gaming setup, and maybe invest in that robotic engineering program I want to attend next summer. Dad says it's too expensive." He paused, then added with complete sincerity, "And I'd give some to people who need it more than me. Like, a lot of kids don't even have computers for school or enough food and stuff." His answer touched me deeply, both in its mix of personal desires and broader awareness and in its contrast to his parents' approach. "Those sound like thoughtful choices," I said. Nathan finished his milk, then asked hesitantly, "Grandma, can I ask you something about your inventions? The sensor things?" "Of course." "How do they actually work? Like, specifically? Dad just keeps talking about how valuable they are, but no one explains what they actually do." I smiled, oddly moved by his interest in the substance rather than the financial value. Would you like me to show you some of my original design notes? They're quite technical, but I think you'd understand the basic principles. His face lit up. Really? Yeah, that would be awesome. We spent the next hour in my study, where I showed him my old research journals and sketched simplified diagrams of how the biosensors functioned. Nathan asked intelligent questions, his curiosity genuine and his enthusiasm infectious. When I demonstrated a basic principle of chemical detection using household items as an analogy, his eyes widened with understanding. So your sensors can detect these tiny changes in blood chemistry before a person even feels sick? He asked. That's right. The technology allows for continuous monitoring rather than periodic testing, which means potential problems can be identified at the earliest possible stage. That's actually really cool, he said with genuine admiration. No wonder that company wants your patents. As Nathan prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. Grandma, I know Dad and Mom are hoping you'll give them some of your money. But I think whatever you decide is okay. It's yours, you know. I hugged him tightly, unexpectedly moved by his simple validation. Thank you, Nathan. That means a great deal to me. After he left, I returned to my study, looking at the papers we had reviewed together, the diagrams, the technical notes, the careful documentation of experiments conducted decades ago. Nathan's genuine interest in the science itself, rather than just its monetary value, had rekindled something important in me. It wasn't just about the settlement or the consulting contract, it was about the work itself, the intellectual contribution, the potential to improve people's lives. That evening, I made a decision. I called my financial advisor and scheduled an appointment for the following morning. Then I sent a message to both Daniel and Jessica. Dinner at my house Saturday, 6 p.m. I'd like to discuss my plans for the settlement funds. The responses came quickly, Jessica's with effusive gratitude for the invitation, Daniel's with a simple acknowledgement and a question about whether Emily and the children should attend. I replied that this initial discussion should include just the three of us. When Saturday arrived, I prepared a simple but elegant dinner. Thomas's favorite roast chicken, fresh vegetables from my garden, and a lemon tart for dessert. I set the table with care, using the good china that usually only emerged for holidays. This occasion, I decided, warranted the special settings. Daniel arrived first, punctual as always, a bottle of expensive wine in hand. Peace offering, he said with a tentative smile. I may have been a bit intense about all this. I accepted the bottle with a nod. We've all been adjusting to unexpected circumstances. Jessica arrived minutes later, bearing flowers and nervous energy. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "Whatever you've decided, Mom, we support you completely." The calculated graciousness wasn't lost on me, but I appreciated the effort at reconciliation. Dinner began with cautious conversation, updates on work projects, the children's activities, community news. The settlement remained the unspoken elephant in the room until I finally addressed it over dessert. I've made some decisions about the settlement funds, I said, setting down my fork. I wanted to share them with you directly. They both leaned forward imperceptibly, attention sharpening. First, I've established educational trusts for Zoe, Nathan, and Olivia. Each will receive funding for undergraduate and graduate education at the institution of their choice, plus a modest stipend for living expenses during their studies. Jessica's face brightened. Mom, that's wonderful. Thank you. I held up a hand to indicate I wasn't finished. Second, I've allocated funds for several philanthropic initiatives. A scholarship for women in science and engineering at Westlake University, funding for the after-school STEM program at Oak Ridge Elementary, and a donation to the Women's Health Clinic downtown. Daniel nodded slowly, his expression careful. Those are worthy causes. Third, I continued, I've set aside funds for my own needs and interests, healthcare considerations, home modifications to allow me to stay independent as long as possible, and resources for travel and continued education. Of course, Jessica said quickly. You should absolutely take care of yourself first. Fourth, I've established a family emergency fund that can be accessed in cases of genuine hardship, major medical expenses not covered by insurance, for example, or significant unexpected financial crises. This fund will be managed by a trustee to ensure it's used as intended. Daniel's brow furrowed slightly. A trustee? You don't trust us to determine what constitutes an emergency? It's not about trust, I explained gently. It's about removing the emotional complications from financial decisions. The trustee provides objective assessment. He didn't look convinced, but nodded reluctantly. Finally, I said, taking a deep breath, I've created a special projects fund. Each of you may submit one proposal annually for a significant project or investment you believe in. These could be business ventures, creative endeavors, or community initiatives. Proposals will be evaluated based on merit, feasibility, and alignment with values I consider important. They exchanged glances, clearly processing this unexpected approach. What sort of values? Jessica asked cautiously. Innovation, equity, community benefit, sustainability, projects that create opportunity rather than simply accumulate wealth. I met each of their gazes in turn. This isn't about writing blank checks. It's about thoughtful partnership in ventures you truly believe in. Daniel's expression was unreadable. So we'd have to apply for funding? Like grant applicants? In essence, yes, with well-developed proposals and clear objectives. That seems rather formal for family, he said, his tone carefully neutral but with an undercurrent of resentment. It is formal, I acknowledged. Deliberately so. This approach ensures that funds are allocated based on merit and potential impact, not simply distributed without consideration. Jessica, always quicker to adapt, leaned forward. I think I understand. You want to be intentional about how the money is used, to make sure it creates meaningful outcomes rather than just being spent. Exactly, I said, grateful for her perception. This settlement represents my life's work, intellectual contributions that were overlooked and uncompensated for decades. I want its use to reflect the values that drove that work. Innovation, progress, opportunity for those who might otherwise be overlooked. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, then asked, And the consulting income? Will that be structured the same way? No, that's compensation for ongoing work, and I'll use it as I see fit. I softened my tone. Daniel, I understand this isn't what you expected, but please try to understand my perspective. This settlement isn't just about money. It's about recognition of work that was taken from me. How I allocate it matters, not just for practical reasons, but as a statement about what I value. He sighed, nodding slowly. I get it. I don't entirely like it, but I get it. With visible effort, he added, And I respect your right to make these decisions. The rest of the evening unfolded more comfortably than I had anticipated. Jessica, ever adaptable, began discussing potential proposals she might develop. Mentorship program for young women in real estate, support for affordable housing initiatives. Daniel remained more reserved, though by the end of the evening, he was cautiously outlining a technology project aimed at improving financial literacy in underserved communities. As they prepared to leave, Jessica hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you, Mom, for standing your ground with Pinnacle and for being so thoughtful about all of this. Daniel's farewell was more measured, but genuine. You've given this a lot of consideration. That's evident. He hesitated, then added, And Nathan hasn't stopped talking about the science lesson you gave him. He says he wants to learn more about biosensors. He's welcome anytime, I said warmly. He asks excellent questions. After they left, I sat in my quiet living room, reflecting on the evening. The conversation had gone better than I'd feared, though I harbored no illusions that all tensions were resolved. Daniel, especially, would need time to adjust his expectations. But it felt like an important step, not just in managing the settlement, funds, but in establishing a new dynamic with my adult children, one based on mutual respect rather than automatic deference on my part. The next morning, I woke early and drove to Pinnacle's new regional office, which had opened just 30 minutes from Oak Ridge. As a consulting partner, I now had access to state-of-the-art research facilities and a team of engineers eager to explore applications of the Wilson Reynolds platform. Dr. Robert Chen, the lead biosensor engineer, greeted me with genuine enthusiasm. "Dr. Wilson, we weren't expecting you until next week's formal meeting." "I had some thoughts I wanted to explore sooner," I explained, pulling out my old research journal. "These are concepts I developed years ago, but never had the opportunity to test. I believe they might be particularly relevant to your current direction." Chen's eyes widened as he reviewed the sketches and notes. "These are remarkably aligned with challenges we've been facing in miniaturization. May I share these with the team immediately?" "That's why I'm here," I said with a smile. For the next several hours, I worked alongside Pinnacle's engineers, explaining my theoretical approaches and listening to their practical implementation challenges. The collaborative energy was invigorating, the perfect blend of my foundational understanding and their cutting-edge technical knowledge. By mid-afternoon, we had outlined a promising new approach to power efficiency that could potentially extend the life of wearable sensors by 40%. The excitement in the lab was palpable as simulations yielded encouraging preliminary results. "This is revolutionary," Chen said as we reviewed the data. "If these projections hold up in physical testing, it could significantly accelerate our development timeline." I nodded, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with the settlement or the consulting fee. This was about the work itself, the intellectual challenge, the collaborative discovery, the potential to improve healthcare monitoring for countless people. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the strange circularity of my journey. Decades after stepping away from active research, I was once again engaged in scientific innovation. The patents that had brought me here were created before Daniel and Jessica were born, their value only now fully realized. But the mind that created those patents had never stopped working, never stopped seeing possibilities, even during all the years of teaching and parenting and grandparenting. I wasn't reclaiming a lost identity. I was finally integrating all aspects of who I was, the scientist, the teacher, the mother, the grandmother, into a whole person whose contributions in every sphere were being properly acknowledged and valued. At home, I found a text message from Zoe. "Gave my presentation today. Everyone was blown away that my grandma is a famous inventor with patents that big companies want. Teacher asked if you'd come speak to our science club sometime. Please say yes?" I smiled, typing back. "I'd be honored. And Zoe, thank you for seeing me, all of me, before anyone else did." Her response came immediately. "Duh, Grandma. You've always been amazing. Everyone else just wasn't paying attention." Out of the mouths of babes, I thought with a smile. Out of the mouths of babes. Part 5, The Transformed Reality. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of Westlake University's Emerging Technology Center, addressing a packed auditorium. The Wilson Reynolds Innovation Symposium had drawn researchers, students, and industry leaders from across the country. In the front row, Catherine sat beside Robert Jenkins from Pinnacle Technologies, both nodding as I described the evolution of our biosensor platform. "The journey from concept to implementation is rarely straightforward," I said, advancing to a slide showing our original patent diagrams alongside the sleek, modern devices now in production. "Innovation requires persistence, adaptation, and sometimes—" I paused, allowing a small smile. the willingness to wait decades for proper recognition. A ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the audience. The story of how Catherine and I had reclaimed our intellectual property had become something of a legend in scientific circles, inspiring renewed examination of other overlooked contributions by women in STEM fields. Today, I'm pleased to announce the first recipients of the Wilson Reynolds Women in Science Fellowships, I continued, gesturing toward 5 young women seated in a reserved section. These brilliant researchers are developing applications of our technology that we could scarcely have imagined 50 years ago. Among the fellowship recipients was Amelia Brooks, whose courageous decision to share Pinnacle's internal documents had been pivotal in our negotiations. After a brief period of uncertainty, she had emerged as a respected figure within the company, recently promoted to lead her own research division focused on pediatric applications of biosensor technology. As I concluded my remarks and stepped away from the podium, the applause was gratifying, but what touched me most deeply was the sight of my family in the audience. Daniel sat beside Emily, their expressions reflecting a newfound respect that had gradually replaced their initial resentment over my settlement decisions. Jessica and Michael were there with Olivia, who waved enthusiastically when she caught my eye. And in the center of the family group, looking immensely proud, were Zoe and Nathan, both wearing T-shirts bearing the logo of the science camp they had attended, using funds from their educational trusts. The transformation in my family relationships hadn't happened overnight. Daniel had initially maintained a cool distance after our settlement discussion, still struggling with the adjustment from seeing me as a dependent elderly parent to recognizing me as an autonomous individual with significant resources and clear boundaries. Jessica had adapted more quickly, embracing the structured approach to funding once she realized it actually provided more substantive support for meaningful projects than random handouts would have. The turning point with Daniel had come 6 months after the settlement, when he finally submitted his first proposal to the Special Projects Fund, not a financial technology venture as he had initially suggested, but rather a collaborative educational initiative. Working with Nathan's science teacher, he had developed a program bringing retired STEM professionals into middle school classrooms, especially in underserved districts. The proposal was thoughtful, detailed, and aligned perfectly with the values I had articulated. When I approved full funding for a 3-year pilot program, Daniel's gratitude had been tinged with something else. A newfound appreciation for the structured approach that demanded substance over entitlement. The program was now thriving in 6 school districts, with plans for statewide expansion. After the symposium, we gathered at my home, no longer the modest house where I had lived for decades, but a beautiful modern residence designed specifically to accommodate both my personal needs and my professional activities. The main floor featured an accessible layout that would allow me to age in place comfortably, while the lower level housed a fully equipped home office and small laboratory, where I continued my consulting work and occasionally hosted student researchers. To Grandma, Zoe toasted at dinner, raising her sparkling cider, who proved that it's never too late for the world to recognize your brilliance. And who makes the coolest science projects for school? Nathan added with a grin, referring to our recent collaboration on his biosensor demonstration. Daniel cleared his throat, uncharacteristically emotional. To Mom, who taught us all that there's more to legacy than money, it's about values, vision, and standing firm for what matters. Jessica, never to be outdone, raised her glass higher. And who showed us that just Grandma was always Dr. Wilson too. We just weren't paying attention. The moment was sweet, but what followed was even more meaningful. As dinner progressed, the conversation wasn't dominated by requests or expectations, but by genuine engagement with ideas. Daniel described challenges in scaling the educational program, asking thoughtful questions about my experiences with institutional expansion. Jessica shared progress on her mentorship initiative for women in real estate, which had recently received additional funding from industry partners impressed by the initial outcomes. Michael, who had always been somewhat peripheral in family dynamics, surprised me by asking detailed questions about the fellowship program structure, offering insights from his legal background about sustainable funding mechanisms. Even Emily, initially the most overtly disappointed by my settlement decisions, engaged enthusiastically about potential applications of biosensor technology in elder care settings. But it was the grandchildren who truly reflected the transformed reality. Zoe, now 16, had shifted her academic focus toward biomedical engineering, inspired not by the financial success of my patents, but by the intellectual challenges of the field. Nathan had developed a passionate interest in the intersection of technology and healthcare accessibility, constantly questioning why advanced monitoring tools weren't available to everyone who needed them. Even young Olivia, absorbing the family's shifted priorities, had begun creating art that explored scientific themes. Late that evening, after everyone had left, Catherine lingered over a final cup of tea. "Quite a different family dynamic than a year ago," she observed with a knowing smile. "Night and day," I agreed, though not without growing pains. "The best transformations usually involve some discomfort," she said. "Speaking of transformation, have you finalized your decision about Pinnacle's new offer?" I nodded. The company had recently approached us about expanding our consulting roles into formal research positions, leading a new division focused on accessibility applications of biosensor technology. The proposal included substantial resources and the freedom to assemble our own research teams. "I'm accepting," I said, with some modifications to ensure I maintain balance between work and family commitments. Catherine smiled. "Margaret Wilson, setting boundaries and conditions. I remember when you wouldn't even tell your children about your patents for fear of seeming prideful." "Different times," I said softly, looking around the beautiful space that reflected both my professional achievements and personal tastes. "Different me." After Catherine left, I sat in my study, reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The financial settlement had certainly changed my material circumstances, providing security and opportunities I never expected at this stage of life. But the true transformation went far deeper. I had reclaimed not just recognition for past achievements, but active engagement with my profession. The consulting work had evolved from occasional advising to substantive collaboration on cutting-edge research. The Wilson Reynolds biosensor platform was now integrated into devices monitoring chronic conditions for patients worldwide, with particular success in preventive applications. More profoundly, I had transformed how I was seen, by my family, by the scientific community, and perhaps most importantly, by myself. I was no longer compartmentalized as just grandma, with my professional identity relegated to a distant past. Instead, I had integrated all aspects of my life into a cohesive whole where grandmother, scientist, mentor, and advocate coexisted harmoniously. The most poignant evidence of this transformation had come unexpectedly, in a school assignment. Zoe had completed the previous month. Asked to write about her most influential role model, she had chosen me, not because I was her grandmother, but because, as she wrote, Dr. Margaret Wilson demonstrates that women's intellectual contributions matter regardless of when they're recognized, that it's never too late to reclaim your rightful place, and that the most powerful legacy isn't money, but the courage to stand firmly in your complete identity. Reading her words, I had wept with the pure joy of being truly seen, not just for what I gave to others, but for who I fundamentally was. As dusk settled over my new home, I moved to the laboratory space, where a prototype of the next generation biosensor awaited testing. At 71, I was engaged in the most fulfilling research of my career, surrounded by colleagues who valued my insights, family who recognized my complete identity, and young women scientists who saw in my journey both inspiration and caution, a reminder to insist on proper attribution from the beginning. The journey from just grandma to Dr. Margaret Wilson hadn't been entirely smooth. There had been difficult conversations, adjusted expectations, and necessary boundaries established. But the outcome, this integrated life where personal relationships and professional contributions reinforced rather than competed with each other, was worth every moment of discomfort. I activated the prototype, watching as the first data points appeared on the monitor. The technology we had envisioned decades, Ego was now saving lives, improving health outcomes, and creating opportunities for a new generation of innovators. And I was still here, not just to witness it, but to actively shape its evolution. Not bad, I murmured to myself, for someone who was supposed to be just a grandmother. The monitor blinked, registering perfect functionality. Another small victory in a lifetime of persistence. Another confirmation that it's never too late to be fully, completely yourself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.